What if I told you that the decades-long debate over Canada's fighter jet purchase, which many thought was settled, done, a closed book, was never really about the aircraft itself? What if I told you it was, in fact, a single-generation choice about the future shape of the Canadian economy, the sovereignty of our nation, and the very soul of our industrial capacity? My friends, we're standing at an inflection point, one that speaks directly to the legacy of the Avro Arrow and the strategic resilience we need in this new, complicated world. This isn't just a procurement headache with budget pressures and political debates that have dragged on for years. This is a reckoning with our identity. We have all seen the headlines. We've heard the talk about cost overruns, procurement delays, and the insistence from some analysts that the F-35 was the only realistic outcome, that our path was somehow predetermined. This narrative, this idea that Canada had no meaningful alternatives, utterly missed the deeper structural tension simmering beneath the surface. That tension, the one about sovereignty, industrial capacity, and the kind of high-value economic future we are willing to build for ourselves, finally burst into the open. And the moment it did, it was because Sweden walked into the room. Let's understand this clearly. Sweden's proposal was far bigger than a military aircraft. What looked like a defense procurement issue suddenly revealed itself as a foundational story about national capability, economic design, and, critically, control over the very technologies that shape a modern state. This is why this moment matters far beyond aviation. It speaks to fundamental questions of dependency, innovation, and long-term resilience that affect every single one of us. Whether you live near an aerospace plant or simply pay taxes, what actually transpired is deceptively simple on the surface. After many years of back and forth, Canada, quite rightly, expressed renewed doubts about the escalating costs and the terms of its planned F-35 purchase. The United States cautioned against withdrawing, emphasizing the risks of unraveling a major defense agreement. That, in itself, would have been a significant policy moment, one worth discussing on its own merit. But then came the Swedish offer, and it was so structurally different from the standard procurement model that it forced policymakers to stop and reassess everything. Instead of presenting a traditional buy this jet package, Saab offered Canada the opportunity to join a co-production ecosystem built around the Gripen E platform. And this is the crux of the matter. It came complete with technology access, domestic assembly, and sovereign control over core mission systems. Let me repeat that. Sovereign control. This was not framed as a simple discount or a rival sales pitch. It was presented as a multi-decade economic partnership, one that would embed Canadian engineers, machinists, and software developers directly into the long-term evolution of the aircraft. For a country that has often struggled to sustain advanced manufacturing at scale, that kind of offer is nothing short of a challenge to old assumptions about what Canada can and cannot build. My friends, are we going to be builders, or are we content to be perpetual buyers? To truly grasp the magnitude of this choice, we must look at the long buildup that led us here, stretching back over 60 years. Canada's aerospace sector has deep historical roots, from the legendary legacy of the Avro Arrow to the rise of major civil aviation firms. Yet over time, a damaging pattern emerged. Canada increasingly consumed foreign-designed defense technologies rather than shaping them. This shift didn't happen because Canadian engineers became less capable. Our talent pool is second to none. It happened because our procurement systems, global supply chains, and geopolitical alignments gradually pushed the country toward foreign dependency as the default setting. And dependency, I must tell you, comes with invisible, insidious costs. Think about it. When the maintenance of your aircraft, the updates to your software, and even the certification of your weapon systems depend entirely on decisions made in another capital, your strategic autonomy narrows. You may not notice it in daily life, but the underlying institutions that protect your territory, your trade routes, and your national infrastructure become shaped by somebody else's rules. That kind of economic reliance also ripples disastrously into civilian sectors, limiting the development of high-value manufacturing, reducing opportunities for skilled workers, and reinforcing a pattern where innovation happens somewhere else while Canada participates mainly as a customer. Is that the kind of legacy we want to leave the next generation? When Sweden entered this conversation, they exposed the mechanics of this system in a way that was unusually clear. The economics of modern fighter jets, and indeed all advanced military systems, hinge on control over software, data, and ongoing upgrades, not just the initial airframe. In many advanced systems, the purchasing country receives the impressive hardware, but remains critically dependent on the producer for mission data files, electronic warfare libraries, and long-term support. Think about the practical implications here, folks. If a Canadian technician cannot modify the threat recognition logic of an aircraft without foreign approval, then Canada does not fully own the capability it has purchased. If essential updates can be delayed or restricted because of export controls, then those aircraft reflect another country's risk assessments rather than Canada's own. These constraints are not malicious. They are simply built into the structure of how global defense markets operate, but they create a system where some states become rule makers and others become rule takers. Sweden's proposal disrupted that entire equation by offering Canada the software keys, the engineering access, and the right to develop indigenous upgrades. This, my friends, is not just a procurement detail, it is a fundamental shift in institutional design. It challenges the assumption that smaller or mid-sized economies must accept limited sovereignty over high-tech defense assets. The moment we secure full control over the software, we gain agency over how our aircraft respond to evolving threats in the Arctic and beyond. The incentives facing the key actors are intensely fascinating. The United States naturally wants to maintain cohesion within NATO's fighter ecosystem. Shared platforms create interoperability, predictable logistics, and influence over long-term technological development. From their institutional perspective, Canada stepping away from the F-35 introduces uncertainty into global supply chains and capability planning. Canada, however, faces its own unique constraints, budget pressures, severe procurement fatigue, and the urgent need to modernize NORAD for the realities of the 21st century. Sweden, meanwhile, is keenly aware that the Arctic is rapidly becoming the critical geopolitical frontier, and aligning with Canada offers immense long-term strategic benefits. None of these actors are behaving irrationally. They are responding to institutional incentives, security commitments, and economic pressures. But when you map those incentives onto the broader context of globalization, technological dependency, and our need for a proactive industrial policy, you begin to see why this proposal has disrupted expectations so sharply. For years, fighter procurement has been framed as a technical choice between platforms, how fast one can fly, or how stealthy the other is. But underneath that simplified framing is a much larger question about our economic structure and our institutional design. When Canada commits to a system like the F-35, it is not merely acquiring an aircraft, it is committing to a decades-long relationship in which maintenance, parts, upgrades, and mission systems flow through a global supply chain dominated by a few powerful actors. That structure certainly benefits from economies of scale, but it also relentlessly entrenches dependency. You might not see the effects every day, but the rules governing how data is shared, how software is controlled, and how industrial participation is allocated can and do diminish a country's ability to shape its own security. What Sweden exposed is a vital truth. This dependence is a choice, not a destiny. When an alternative emerges that offers technology transfer and domestic co-production, it highlights exactly how much policy space Canada had quietly surrendered over the years. Suddenly, policymakers have to confront the reality that the familiar procurement model was not the only option, and the path that seemed inevitable was in fact the result of institutional inertia rather than structural necessity. The mechanics of the Swedish model deserve careful and prolonged attention because they reveal how differently innovation ecosystems can be organized. The Gripen program has historically emphasized modularity, maintainability, and sovereign adaptability. In practical terms, that means the aircraft is designed so that Canada can update subsystems without requiring foreign approval, integrate new weapons from multiple suppliers, ensuring our forces always have the best tools, regardless of political shifts, and maintain the jet using local personnel with relatively modest infrastructure, a critical feature for a country with a vast Arctic territory, long distances between bases, and brutal winter conditions. But what matters most, economically and strategically, is the institutional philosophy behind the design. Sweden built the Gripen to empower smaller states to control their air power. In stark contrast, the F-35 program is built around a centralized global enterprise that spreads cost but, critically, centralizes authority. These two different philosophies create two radically different economic outcomes. One model treats the buyer as a client who participates in a global system. The other treats the buyer as a partner who shapes that system. When Sweden offered Canada not just the jet, but the chance to become a co-developer, it challenged an underlying assumption about where innovation is supposed to happen and who gets to participate in it. This shift in perspective is what explains the intensity of the reaction in Washington and other NATO capitals. Major defense programs depend on predictability, and Canada stepping outside the expected technological alignment introduces uncertainty into that meticulously built framework. From an institutional standpoint, the United States has built a system in which allies help sustain the economic viability of the F-35 while also aligning their military capabilities with American standards. This is not simply about military power. It is about industrial ecosystems, research agendas, and the political leverage that comes from shaping technological norms. When a country like Canada considers a different model, it immediately raises questions about whether other states might also seek arrangements that give them more autonomy. It is not that Sweden's proposal threatens NATO cooperation. It doesn't. It's that it challenges a set of unwritten rules about who controls what within the alliance. But for Canada, the broader consequences extend far beyond alliance politics. The choice on the table has the potential to reshape our industrial trajectory for a generation. A co-production agreement would mean thousands of high-skilled jobs, not only in assembly, but in the vital fields of software engineering, avionics, and systems integration. It would mean a new institutional framework in which Canadian universities, research labs, and manufacturers participate directly in defense innovation rather than standing awkwardly at arm's length. It would mean a structural shift in Canada's economic identity, reinforcing the crucial idea that advanced manufacturing is not something that must be outsourced to other countries. That matters deeply for the Canadian workers who have seen aerospace employment fluctuate, and for the communities that once relied on industrial capacity that has gradually eroded. When a country rebuilds capability, it simultaneously rebuilds opportunity. The distribution of those opportunities determines who benefits from economic growth and who is left behind. Defense procurement rarely gets discussed in these terms. We talk about metal and thrust, but the underlying economic effects shape wages, regional development, and the long-term resilience of our national workforce. This is a chance to turn the tide, to reclaim some of the industrial ground we lost since the late 1952. At the same time, we must acknowledge the immediate human considerations behind these institutional choices. Whether Canada ultimately chooses the F-35 or the Gripen E, the people who maintain these aircraft, the families who rely on aerospace jobs, and the communities that host military bases will feel the consequences. For those working in existing supply chains linked to American defense production, a shift would introduce uncertainty, a real and understandable concern. But for workers in regions poised to gain from new co-production facilities, Sweden's offer represents a rare, powerful chance to participate in a growing, high-value industry. These are not abstract policy debates. They affect real livelihoods, and beyond the economics, they profoundly shape national identity. Canadians want to feel that their country can design and build advanced technologies, that we are not merely purchasers, but active contributors on the world stage. When a country sees itself as capable, that confidence ripples into other sectors and influences how the next generation imagines its own opportunities right here at home. That, my friends, is why this moment feels so charged. It is not only about jets, it is about the kind of future Canadians believe they can create. Let's dig deeper into the concept of software sovereignty. Modern fighter jets are fundamentally software-defined machines, and control over that software determines who truly owns the capability. If every significant update, every new threat identification protocol, every tweak to electronic warfare logic requires foreign authorization, then the aircraft effectively becomes an extension of another country's strategic priorities. If, instead, Canada can write, test, and implement its own mission data files, we gain decisive agency over our military readiness. That distinction shapes military readiness, but it also creates economic opportunity. Software sovereignty means building, training, and sustaining teams of Canadian engineers who can develop advanced algorithms, test electronic warfare libraries, and model scenarios without waiting for external permission. For younger workers entering the tech and aerospace sectors, that kind of capacity building determines where the high-value jobs grow and where innovation ecosystems take root. And for a country like Canada, which has been trying desperately to expand its advanced tech industries, the difference between owning and renting capability matters more than most people realize. This becomes even more significant when we consider the Arctic, which is quickly becoming both a strategic and an economic frontier. Melting sea routes, increased shipping, foreign investment, and the expansion of Russian military infrastructure have created a region where security, climate change, and economic opportunity intersect violently. Operating effectively in the Arctic requires aircraft that can function far from major bases, withstand harsh temperatures, and be serviced by relatively small teams on short notice. The Gripen's focus on ruggedness, modularity, and rapid maintainability is a direct answer to the challenges of our vast North. But just as importantly, our Arctic defense requires the ability to adapt quickly as the security environment changes. If Canada has to wait for foreign updates every time a new threat emerges or a new radar signature needs to be added, our ability to defend our northern territory becomes constrained by timelines we do not control. When you think about how vital the Arctic is becoming not only for national security but for global trade supply chains, those constraints look less like technicalities and more like structural vulnerabilities. Sweden's model attempts to close those gaps by embedding sovereignty into the design, giving Canada not just the right to operate aircraft in the Arctic, but the essential right to shape how those aircraft evolve over time in response to immediate and local threats. Yet, running beneath all of this is a broader story about globalization. For years, advanced manufacturing in many countries has been hollowed out by global production networks designed to maximize efficiency but not resilience. Jobs shifted abroad, supply chains stretched across continents, and domestic industrial capabilities atrophied. The result has been an economy in which countries like Canada often find themselves buying complex systems from abroad instead of building them at home. That pattern might seem efficient on paper, but it creates a profound fragility that becomes glaringly obvious in moments of crisis or rapid technological shift. When Sweden offered co-production, it wasn't just offering jobs, it was offering a divergence from the prevailing dependency-driven logic of global supply chains. It was offering a chance to rebuild a local ecosystem of skilled labor, research partnerships, and engineering expertise. And that offer forces a question about the very design of Canada's economy. Should we continue participating in a global system that emphasizes dependence on a few dominant producers? Or should we try to reconstruct domestic capacity that can anchor future innovation and provide long-term stability for our communities? This also brings us to the issue of who benefits from these systems and who bears the risks. The costs of long-term dependency are often distributed broadly across our workers, our regions, and our taxpayers, but the benefits of participating in global defense programs tend to accrue to a small, concentrated set of multinational firms and political actors. When maintenance has to be outsourced abroad, local workers lose opportunities. When upgrades depend on foreign political decisions, taxpayers may end up paying significantly more over time. And when industrial offsets are limited, regions that once built aircraft are left with underdeveloped infrastructure and declining employment. The immense value of Sweden's proposal, at least from an economic design perspective, is that it redistributes some of those essential benefits back to the domestic economy. But that also means redistributing power and responsibility. If Canada accepts a more sovereign model, we must then take responsibility for building and maintaining the talent pipeline, investing in our research institutions, and sustaining a long-term industrial strategy. Sovereignty, after all, comes with obligations as well as freedoms. And part of this debate is about whether Canada is willing to embrace both wholeheartedly. None of these complex decisions happen in a vacuum. Our policymakers operate under competing immense pressures from allies, domestic industries, budgetary constraints, and public opinion. The United States wants cohesion. Sweden wants partnership. Canada wants security and economic growth. But the interests of these actors do not perfectly align. And because the F-35 has become a highly visible symbol of technological sophistication within NATO, any deviation feels like a political statement, even if the actual goal is simply to pursue a more balanced and domestically beneficial industrial strategy. That tension creates significant political risk. Choosing the familiar path minimizes diplomatic friction, but preserves entrenched dependency. Choosing the sovereign path maximizes industrial opportunity, but introduces diplomatic questions and a higher initial lift for our national institutions. And in the middle of all of this are Canadian voters, you, my audience, many of whom simply want a clear, honest explanation of why these jets matter for your communities, your jobs, and your taxes. We need to understand why a decision framed as a technical procurement issue is so deeply connected to the structure of the economy we live in every single day. As we conclude this analysis, what must stay with us is how this single proposal exposed the deeper, uncomfortable questions Canada has avoided for far too long. This was never just about whether one jet performs slightly better than another in a test range. It was about who controls the technology a modern country relies on, who gets to participate in building it, and who benefits from the jobs, the skills, and the generational opportunities that flow from it. Sweden's offer did something truly extraordinary. It reminded Canada that dependency is not inevitable, and that industrial decline is not a natural condition. It showed concretely that with the right partnerships and the right institutional design, a country can rebuild the advanced capabilities it once thought were lost forever. At the same time, sticking with the familiar path of the F-35 has its own logic. It offers predictability, guaranteed interoperability, and a clear connection to an existing established global framework. But it also means accepting the limits that come with it, including constraints on autonomy that shape our military readiness and economic opportunity in ways most people never see, yet profoundly feel. For all of you, this moment matters because it reveals exactly how decisions made in distant policy rooms ripple outward into your wages, your regional development, your tax burdens, and the future shape of the Canadian economy. You might never work on a fighter jet, but you absolutely live in a system shaped by the same powerful forces of dependency and institutional design. Whether Canada chooses sovereignty or predictability, boldness or familiarity, the decision will signal precisely how much value this country places on building domestic capability instead of perpetually importing it. And that, I believe, is the essential question every modern, self-respecting economy eventually has to answer. My deepest hope is that this moment encourages a broader, more intense reflection among all Canadians about how we design our institutions, and critically, who they are built to serve. Are we serving a global supply chain, or are we serving the future prosperity and security of our own people? I want to hear from you, my friends. Do you agree that the most critical factor here is software sovereignty? Or do you believe that entrenched NATO interoperability with the F-35 outweighs the chance to rebuild our own high-tech industrial base? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and let's keep this vital conversation going. Friends, if this deep dive into Canadian sovereignty and industrial potential resonated with you, Show your support by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. We are building a community that demands accountability and resilience. Your participation drives this conversation forward. Now, I want to hear your unique perspective on this pivotal decision. To continue the discussion, tell me, 1. What specific Canadian industry beyond aerospace do you see benefiting most from a sovereign co-production model? How much weight should policymakers give to the historic legacy of the Avro era when making this choice? Do you believe Canada's Arctic defense needs are truly being prioritized in the current procurement discussion? Keep learning, keep asking the questions that matter, and may your future be filled with health and prosperity.